Please be seated. Now, I would like you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine, if you will, about a dozen young men standing in the middle of the street looking up. Just looking up. If you were to see them, what would you think of them? Perhaps a little bit crazy. Now imagine, if you will, somebody else comes up to them and says, "What you looking at?" That's the angel. And that's sort of the story that you can open your eyes by now. Son. Anyway, now we've got our angel. And the angel says, "So, what are you looking at?" Now, every year we've ever done this reading from Acts, I have always heard the voice of the angel in my head as being kind of curious or maybe a little amused. Look at these guys just standing up there. "Oh, what you looking at?" But this year, when I was reading it, I heard a different voice. I heard a voice that I used to hear a lot when I lived in Manhattan. And so in my head, I have this angel coming up to these dozen young guys. He says, "What you looking at?" And that is the voice that now I can't get out of my head. I got a New York angel saying, "What you looking at?" And all I can think is, man, that's attitude for an angel. That's a lot of attitude. What's going on with all that? Because whenever I heard anything like that, first of all, I got scared. Because if somebody ever said that to me, that meant that was like a challenge or dare. That meant I was looking at something I shouldn't be looking at. And so I heard that New York angel voice, and I'm thinking, what's up with that? I mean, I would have done exactly what the disciples did, wouldn't you? I mean, if you saw Jesus sort of standing there talking to you, and then all of a sudden he goes up to the air and disappears, wouldn't you just be standing there looking at him saying, "Wow"? But maybe New York angel is right. Because New York angel remembers something that we forget a lot of the times. And that is that Luke wrote the Gospel and Acts a long, long time after the events actually occurred. We're talking decades after the resurrection and the ascension. That's important to remember. Because what Luke was doing was writing to a group of people who were not those people back at the time. He was writing to a group of people who were living in a different time and were a different group of people. He was writing to the church after decades of development. And he was writing them with a message. A message that he delivered through that angel who encountered the disciples. And what was the message? It's really a simple message. Get your heads out of the clouds and back down where they belong. You see, what was going on in those days was that the early Christians believed from the very beginning that Jesus was going to be coming back any day now. I mean, you saw how Jesus says, "I'm going to come back down, riding down on cloud in glory." And when he said that, they thought he meant like next Thursday. And next Thursday came and he didn't come down. And they said, well, clearly it probably means, next week. And next week. And next week. And suddenly, first of all, they got worried that he wasn't coming. And others thought, hey, listen, if he's coming soon, we don't have to deal with the rest of the world. We don't have to worry about feeding the poor or welcoming the stranger. We don't have to worry about injustice. We don't have to worry about visiting the prisoners. We don't have to worry about any of that because He's coming soon anyway, and we're already saved, so we're good. We're just going to sit here and have our time together in our own little groups, have our agape meals with extra wine. We don't have to mess with anybody else or anything else. That was one of the problems that was seeping into the church in those early decades. And Luke said, wait a minute, that's not what Jesus taught us. So Luke takes that example of the angel. When the disciples are sitting there staring up, and he says, get your heads down. Look around you. Don't worry about when Jesus is going to come, because it doesn't matter. He'll come when he comes. What matters is how he finds you. What matters is how you live in the world right now. What matters is if you are living your lives the way Jesus taught you. So are you feeding the hungry? Are you welcoming the alien into your midst? Are you seeking justice for the disenfranchised? Are you healing the sick? And for Luke, of course, healing the sick was really important. That's why they called him the beloved physician. Are you preaching good news to those who have no hope? What the angel is saying to the disciples is exactly what Luke is saying to us, which is, you have a job to do. For however long we are in this world, we have a job to do, and it is to make the gospel known. It is to make Christ's love known in the world. This is not something that only the ancient church struggled with. Throughout our history, we've had this tendency to sort of withdraw from the problems of the world. Remember how I've talked about slavery in the Episcopal Church over the years? One of the reasons the Episcopal Church never wanted to say anything about slavery, even as the Quakers were, and then eventually the Methodists were, and the Presbyterians were, and we never said anything about it. And why? One of the reasons was because we had the attitude that we do not belong to this world. We should not engage in the issues of the world. That was actually taught. But one of my favorite writers of about that era, that is to say the era of the Civil War and before, was a guy named Mark Twain. You may have heard of him. And he wrote about this very issue. He wrote a story about a little boy who was the perfect little boy. And he summarized everything about this little boy with one neat line. He said, he was so heavenly minded that he was no earthly good. That's what was happening to the church in the early days. They were so heavenly minded that they were no earthly good. They were all insular, just wrapped up in each other. And whenever we do that, this is what Luke says, whenever we do that, then we are leaving behind the gospel. Then we are failing to look around and see what God has put right in front of us. The opportunities to share Christ's love in so many different ways. When we do that, we miss the gift that God has given us. Stewardship of this planet. Stewardship of each other. Care for each other. Seeing the face of Christ in each other. Luke is saying, just don't be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. And so what our New York angel is saying when he says, what you looking at? He continues by saying, that's right, nothing, because there's nothing up there to see. Everything you need to see is right around you. Now get to it. That doesn't mean, however, that it's not okay to take a peek every now and then. To just take a peek up to the heavens now and then. When you think about it, that's what we're doing when we come to church. We're just taking a peek at heaven. That's what we do when we go to morning prayer on Wednesdays. That's what we do when we go to Bible study. That's what we do when we go to the Bible classes in between the services. We're just getting a peek at heaven. There's nothing wrong with that. Because what that does, it does a few things. One is, it reminds us that we don't belong here. It reminds us that we are not of this world, that we are God's children, that we belong with God. We're here, and it's good that we're here. But we're only here for a while, and then we go home. Another thing it reminds us is that we are more than simply here to survive. It reminds us when we just take a peek up to heaven that we are so much more than just here to survive. We're here to live, to have life and to have it more fully. We're here to love the way Christ loved us. That's what it reminds us. Another thing it reminds us of is that Christ will come again. We don't know when. And it doesn't matter when. That's irrelevant. We trust that Christ will come again. And when he does, it will be to bring us to himself. I admit, every now and then I do catch myself peeking up at heaven. And sometimes I imagine maybe I might just get a glance of Christ in his glory. Maybe I might catch a glance of him coming down in his glory. Because, as another famous New York saying goes, hey, you never know. Amen.